My first car was an orange Super Beetle. I called it George. My dad had been helping me look for a car for quite some time, and a Super Beetle is really a special car. George in particular was special. He had a sunroof, there was air conditioning, which was not at all common in a 1974 economy car. I mean, there was just a little bit of rust in the floor pans. You could only see a few places where, you could look through at the road as you were driving down the highway. My enthusiasm was contagious though, and my dad agreed that we could buy the car. So we bought it, and we came back a few days later to pick it up. And, oh man, we could still see the guy's house where we bought the car as we sat on the side of the road with a pillar of black smoke reaching about 50 feet in the air. Cars are tricky things because on one level, we just need them to get from point A to point B. But actually, and especially when we're young, we want our vehicles to say something about who we are, even if all that we want to say is that we're the sort of person who just wants to get from point A to point B. And maybe you don't get these strong feelings about a vehicle, and that's okay. It might be something else for you. Maybe it's your sense of fashion, or you have a favorite hobby that you're always talking about. It might be your house, or it might be your kids. I mean, there's different things, different activities, different relationships that help inform us and the world around us just who we are. And so as a part of our Build More Fires series, we've been spending some time in Exodus, looking at fire and the role it played in establishing the identity of God's chosen people. First, we looked at how God used fire to draw Moses' attention to God and to call Moses to a particular ministry. Last week, we were looking at how God used a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire to lead his people together towards the promised land, but not down the direct route. So the story of the golden calf in Exodus 32 is one that I think sometimes we miss the significance of it because we take a conveniently simplistic view of the situation. This is something that our culture is really good at. We look down oftentimes on the people that have come before us. And because the culture and the circumstances here seem so foreign on the face of it, we misinterpret their motivations and their actions as being the result of old-fashioned or backwards thinking. And this is really convenient for us because it allows us to deny the shared humanity that we have with these people. That shared humanity, we're talking about our fallen nature here, led them to make this terrible mistake. And it's a mistake that we're still making today. It's really easy to see how others recast God. It's easy to see how the Israelites fail in this way, but it's hard to see the ways that we try to keep God on a leash, to fit him into our life on our terms. Two verses I want you to consider today. In Psalm chapter 115, verse 8, the psalmist writes, "Those who make idols become like them. So do all who trust in them." And let's head back to Romans 12. We were reading there last week as well. Romans 12:2, Paul writes, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect." The psalm makes it really clear that we become like the things that we worship. When we make idols for ourselves, and even of ourselves, we will become increasingly hollow, increasingly empty, and that's not what God intends for us. Paul tells us in Romans 12 here that we're to be transformed by looking at God's will. We can't look within ourselves to become the better people that we need to be, that God created us to be. We have to look to God, not idolatry. And idolatry in its most basic form is always self-worship. It's self-service. So we're going to be taking a look this week at 3 ways that the Israelites were tempted in this particular case. And remember, we're going all the way back to the beginning. God hasn't even given the law yet. And so as we go through these 3 temptations to recast God according to our own requirements, our own standards, I think you'll see that idolatry is alive and well in our culture today, sometimes even in our own hearts. Because from the very beginning, idolatry isn't so much about pagan misconceptions as it is about the heart that we have. Idolatry springs from our own selfishness. I think it's very likely that the Israelites, and especially Aaron, in their own minds, they were convinced that they were doing this for God's own good, for God's own glory. When we rely only on our own ability to understand and process our worship of God, we fall into patterns of self-worship and idolatry, even as we claim the name of Jesus. Because remember, the heart of idolatry is always about self-worship. So the first big temptation that we see the Israelites falling for is impatience. You see, we want God to fit our timetables. We want Him to fit into our expectations. And the Israelites were no different. They didn't have fast food and all of the modern conveniences that we have, but they wanted things as easy as possible. In Matthew 5, we see that where our treasure is, there our heart will be also. And we mix this up sometimes, and we say that where our treasure is, we want God to be there also. We want God to be a convenient accessory for our lives. And here the Israelites have literally made a god for themselves out of their fashion accessories, their jewelry, their valuables. Their treasure became a tool to attempt to transform the image that they had of God. So I want to ask you today, in what ways do we wrestle with impatience today? I want you to leave your comments down below or email me, weston@gracepoint.ca. I'm really looking forward to hearing from you. I'd also love it if you could make it out for our weekly discussions that we have every Sunday at 6:30. We're meeting in the Glenview Nazarene Church just behind Walmart on Strachan Road. Rain or shine. So it was rainy this week. We met indoors with social distancing in place, and we sure would love to have you join us this next week. Thank you so much for your time today, and God bless.